after Auschwitz, there's a new covenant, forged by the willingness of Jews to survive and flourish through memory, witness, and a redefined faithfulness. Solidarity for Wiesel becomes a form of witness to the dead, the martyrs of the Holocaust. Remembering the Holocaust sanctifies life after Auschwitz. To forget the Holocaust would be worse than sacrilege. Wiesel agrees with Rubinstein that the covenant was shattered at Auschwitz. But Rubinstein says there can be no retroactive solidarity with the dead of Auschwitz. The dead of Auschwitz are not martyrs. They made no choice in being slaughtered. They died within the void of God's absence. And there is no additional covenant that confers meaning on the Jewish future. For Rubinstein, there is only the political imperative of using power to sustain Israel's existence and the question of whether Jews will live with dignity and courage in a meaningless existence. The emotional force of these Holocaust theologies comes through whenever Mark writes about them. It's more than a question of being fair or of accurately representing rival possibilities. Mark cut his teeth intellectually on the argument between Wiesel and Rubinstein. He has lived within these viewpoints for many years, felt their power, measured their limitations, and found his way by saying a small yes and a larger no to both of them. Though he's written about this subject before, his new book presents his most perceptive and compelling work on it. Near the end, he admonishes that the days of publicly memorializing the Holocaust are coming to an end. I took a long pause there, and I'm pausing even now as to whether I'm going to confess this. For 18 years, I taught religious studies at Kalamazoo College. And on the side, I ran a chapel program. This program was ecumenical and interfaith. It was not restricted to organized religions. We had services that were spiritual but not religious, some that were spiritual, religious but not very spiritual, and there were many that were just straightforwardly secular. One year, the aggressively atheist wing of the faculty tried to abolish the chapel program that I was providing for free. And every year there were complaints that there were too many services that were interfaith or that were too secular. And every year we had a Holocaust memorial observance. This was a hugely attended, overflowing service. So big that for a few years we had to hold one in the afternoon and then come back in the evening for another one. There were always survivors and Jewish congregants who drove considerable distances to get there. And with them especially in mind, I was an assiduous gatekeeper of Wiesel's rules for these occasions. Do not substitute your memory for theirs. Let the martyrs and survivors tell their story in their words. There's plenty of testimony to draw on. It should be enough for you. Wait, at least, until the last survivor is gone before you remember them with your memories and hang-ups. For 10 years, that is exactly what I did on these occasions. Working with musicians and students and local Jewish congregations to put the service together. Every year it was completely different and always the same. The music and readings changed, but not the Wiesel definition of what it means to remember the Holocaust. For 10 years, hardly anybody disputed the rules. We did not allow students to read their poems. We did not allow Christians to talk about themselves and their guilt. And we stayed off politics. The rest of the year, my chapel services were notorious for dealing constantly with political issues, but not at the Holocaust. It was not until the late 1990s that we started to get students who rebelled against this arrangement. At first, it was just because they wanted to read their poems and talk about themselves. They were not impressed with Elie Wiesel's authority on this subject, and that first year, I was offended. I thought, Who are you to ruin this service? You're 19 years old. You grew up in a shopping mall. You've never done anything for social justice. But I gave some ground, and most of the rules stayed in place. The next year, the students were more rebellious, and the year after that, they completely rebelled. This time, they were organized and determined, and no, they were not willing to read a selection from Viktor Frankl. To make this service relevant to their generation, they had to take it over. And I had to face the anger and disappointment of hundreds of older folks who cherished the older model. In my last years at Kalamazoo, we kept doing Holocaust memorial services, but we threw out the rules. The crowds that came were smaller, sometimes with a few more students. And we said plainly that we should not remember the Holocaust in a way that silences other struggles against oppression and exclusion. I do not regret those early services, which were powerfully moving and sometimes consoling for many who attended them. But I witnessed as a college chaplain what Marx says in the conclusion of Encountering the Jewish Future, that Jews and Christians have moved on in significant ways, and that ecumenical organizations have overinvested in a remembrance model that silences criticism of Israel. Encountering the Jewish Future is strewn with insightful comparisons of Wiesel and Rubinstein, Heschel and Buber, and Rubinstein and Heschel, and so on. But what I treasure most in this book are Marx's clear and very hard-earned conclusions. There is more than one way to defend the creation and legitimacy of Israel as a state. Blaming the Palestinians for not accepting Israel as a state is wrong and misguided. You cannot commit ethnic cleansing and be innocent before those whom you have transgressed. The Palestinians are the bridge into the future for Israel. And the dialectic of Christian culpability and Jewish innocence must give way to a mutual relationship of confession and hope. In the third edition of Toward a Jewish Theology of Liberation, Mark observes that most authors are thrilled if a book of theirs is still relevant a decade later. For him, it's been very different. Everything that he protested against in the first edition concerning the crisis of Israel and Palestine has gotten worse. The plight of the Palestinians has become so much worse. As violence has become normative in Israel, a policing of Jewish thought has become normative, exactly as Hannah Arendt warned. More than once, Mark has recalled that he felt lonely when he began writing in the late 1980s, lacking a model for his project of Jewish liberation theology. Then his book came out, and he realized that he had more company than he thought. He met other Jews who shared his feelings and perspective. His brave words about reviving the prophetic impulse took on greater reality as he met others who were doing it, especially among Jews, Michael Lerner and Susanna Heschel, among Christians, Rosemary Ruther and Cornel West. Mark says at the end that it's not too late for the Jewish identity of the future to be one of hope and solidarity. But, as he says, that will require turning a historical corner. Mark Ellis does not write to persuade skeptics, or to refute his critics, or to show off his knowledge. He writes to give witness to the prophetic impulse, and to strengthen those who share a similar impulse and testimony, and he does it with a magnificent prophetic spirit.